I call upon God's name, and on my own I call upon God's name, and on my own I call upon God's name, and on my own I call upon God's name, and on my own I call upon God's name, and on my own, because we're one with God. I'm Willie from the Ozarks, and I'm so glad you've come to join me in studying A Course in Miracles workbook for students. And the text, we're ready for lesson 183. I call upon God's name and on my own. And it is lesson 183. We're reading from the original edition here on what'll be Sunday, July the 2nd of 2023. I make my recordings a few days earlier, so it's not actually Sunday for me, but it will be for you when you watch it, I hope. And it may be a year or two or many years before you listen to this. Welcome and thank you for joining me. And it may not be Sunday for you, but it is the July the 2nd lesson. God's name is holy, but no holier than yours. To call upon his name is but to call upon your own. To call upon God's name is to call upon your own. The Christ, that little child in you that has the strength of the universe. A father gives his name to his son and thus identifies the son with him. His brothers share his name, and thus are they united in a bond to which they turn for their identity. Your Father's name reminds you who you are, even within a world that does not know, even though you have not remembered it. God's name cannot be heard without response, nor said without an echo in the mind which calls you to remember. Say his name, and you invite the angels to surround the ground on which you stand, and sing to you as they spread out their wings to keep you safe and shelter you from every worldly thought that would intrude upon your holiness. Repeat God's name, and all the world responds by laying down illusions. Repeat God's name, and all the world responds by laying down illusions. Every dream the world holds dear has suddenly gone by, and where it seemed to stand, you find a star, a miracle of grace. The sick arise, healed of their sickly thoughts. The sick arise, healed of their sickly thoughts. The blind can see, the deaf can hear, the sorrowful cast off their mourning, and the tears of pain are dried as happy laughter comes to bless the world. Repeat the name of God, and little names have lost their meaning. No temptation but becomes a nameless and unwanted thing before God's name. Repeat the name of God, and little names have lost their meaning. No temptation but becomes a nameless and unwanted thing before God's name. Repeat his name and see how easily you will forget the names of all the gods you value. They have lost the name of God you gave them. They become anonymous and valueless to you, although before you let the name of God replace their little names. You stood before them worshipfully, naming them as gods. Let's read that sentence again. They have lost the name of God you gave them. They become anonymous and valueless to you, although before you let the name of God replace their little names. You stood before them worshipfully, naming them as gods. Repeat the name of God and call upon yourself, whose name is his. Repeat the name of God and call upon yourself, whose name is his. Repeat his name, and all the tiny nameless things on earth slip into right perspective. Those who call upon the name of God cannot mistake the nameless for the name. nor sin for grace, nor bodies for the Holy Son of God. And should you join a brother as you sit with him in silence and repeat God's name along with him within your quiet minds, you have established there an altar which reaches to God Himself and to His Son. Practice but this today. Repeat God's name slowly, again and still again. Become oblivious to every name but His. Hear nothing else. Let all your thoughts become anchored on this. No other words we use except at the beginning when we say today's idea but once. I call upon God's name and on my own. And then God's name becomes our only thought, our only word, the only thing that occupies our minds, the only wish we have, the only sound with any meaning, and the only name of everything that we desire to see, of everything that we would call our own. Thus do we give an invitation which can never be refused, and God will come and answer it Himself. Think not He hears the little prayers of those who call on Him with names of idols cherished by the world. They cannot reach Him thus. He cannot hear requests that He be not Himself, or that His Son receive another name than His. Repeat His name, and you acknowledge Him as sole creator of reality. And you acknowledge also that His Son is part of Him, creating in His name. Sit silently. That means your mind, your thoughts. Sit silently and let His name become the all-encompassing idea which holds your mind completely. The idea which holds your mind completely. Let all thoughts be still except this one. And to all other thoughts respond with this, and see God's name replace the 1,000 little names you gave your thoughts, not realizing that there is one name for all there is and all that there will be. Today you can achieve a state in which you will experience the gifts of grace. You can escape all bondage of the world and give the world the same release you found. You can remember what the world forgot and offer it to your own remembering. You can accept today the part you play in its salvation and your own as well, and both can be accomplished perfectly. Turn to the name of God for your release, and it is given you. No prayer but this is necessary, for it holds them all within it. Words are insignificant, and all requests unneeded when God's Son calls on His Father's name. Words are insignificant, so don't be too caught up with what the actual word name is, because God's name is an idea that we want to identify with as His Son. Words are insignificant and all requests unneeded when God's Son calls on His Father's name. His Father's thoughts become His own. He makes His claim to all His Father gave, is giving still, and will forever give. He calls on Him to let all things He calls on Him to let all things He thought He made be nameless now. And in their place the holy name of God becomes His judgment of their worthlessness. All little things are silent. Little sounds are soundless now. The little things of earth have disappeared. The universe consists of nothing but the Son of God, who calls upon His Father. There's what you want to do. You want to call upon your Father. And His Father's voice gives answer in His Father's holy name. In this eternal, still relationship in which communication far transcends all words and yet exceeds in depth and height whatever words could possibly convey, is peace eternal. In our Father's name we would experience this peace today, and in His name it shall be given us. Wow. Given the peace of God. For years I read that and I kept thinking, well, I wonder what is the name of God? And I got caught up in the words. Don't get caught up in the words is why I tried to say that. Just beseech God, the nameless, that who cannot have a name, or has many names. Pick one. The point is that it's your Creator who loves you, and we're calling upon Him, and we're identifying with Him as family, and we're seeing all of creation as that family. Okay, I call upon God's name and on my own, and then find that peace within by calling, and be still and quiet. Let your mind and thoughts be still as you've said, I call upon God's name and on my own. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading for today. And we're ready for, we're in chapter 19, Beyond the Body, and we're ready for section Roman numeral 3, Sin versus Error. And as you're turning there, let's, what on earth is going on today? Build a Scarecrow Day. If you have corn coming on, you want to keep the crows out of it, build a scarecrow. I've heard people say, there's a little rhyme, and I forget what it is offhand, but one for me, or no, plant, what is it? Plant one for me, one for the crow, and one for my friend or something. We'll see if I can find it. But anyway, the idea is plant more than one seed. If you want some corn, well, you've got to plant a block of it for about 12 years in a round circle. It's the best so they can pollinate, like we talked about the other day. But don't plant just if you want a dozen ears of corn, well, then you better plant 2 dozen. That way you let the raccoons, and which I have a raccoon friend that's been visiting me a lot. And he's been quite a friendly little guy. I named him, or we've been calling him Zorro. And you see that white moth that just flew by? That is a white butterfly, but it's a cabbage moth, and they hit all the brassicas. So it's starting to get warm. Brassicas tend to lay off when it starts getting warm. These cabbage moths eat them up. So it's nice, and that's why I'm parked here in front of my kale. Pick your kale, take the bottom leaves like this and break them off. And the reason I say the bottom leaves is because they're not getting much light. And if they get looking like that, I just toss them on the ground for compost. But the nice ones I take in the house, and you can kind of see how I'm doing it. And so it's time to make kale chips or canned kale or whatever you want to do to preserve it. It'll keep in the refrigerator for probably a month, no problem. What else do I say? Freedom from Fear of Speaking Day. We stopped at Build a Scarecrow Day. Freedom from Fear of Speaking Day. I Forgot Day for the absent-minded folks. A holiday for you. Made in the USA Day. National Anisette Day. And Anisette is a liqueur made from anise, and we'll talk about anise in just a minute. Second Half of the Year Day. Begins the second half of the year today. And congratulations, you've made it through half of the Course of Miracles if you began on January the 1st with me. And you've been doing your lessons. Special thanks to you. Special Recreation for the Disabled Day. World Sports Journalist Day. World UFO Day. Wow. And you know, my personal thinking about UFOs is that it's obvious that there's other creations. In my mind, it's so obvious. Whether you want to call them physical or non-physical, that there's multitudes of creation of intelligent beings, way more intelligent than humans have reached, and we should call on them. And once you've reached the level where you've gone beyond what human intelligence is at, I would say that's when there's no need to worry about them hurting you, because they've moved past the idea of threat. They understand the oneness of creation, and they're using principles that they would like to share with us in transport and in knowing. And I expect that I always consider A Course in Miracles to be one of those kind of extraterrestrial manifestations from beyond our present realm. Okay, told you I wanted to tell you about Anise herb. Pimpinella anisum is the genus and species. It's a frost tender annual that can grow in zones 4 through 11. Anise seed is a powerful plant that is rich in many nutrients and boasts a wide array of health benefits. It has anti-fungal, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory properties, and may fight stomach ulcers, keep blood sugar levels in check, and reduce symptoms of depression and menopause. And that's thanks to healthline.com. And then I also wanted to tell you about the Wowza. I think I might have pronounced it wrong yesterday, which is a bush cherry. The best for fresh eating, and this is out of Gurney's, with a flavor that offers the best sweet pie cherries and melt-in-the-mouth texture. Wowza will have you reaching for another and another. Wowza becomes sweeter as it ripens, so pick it at its bright red stage for tart pie cherry flavor, or pick a week later for more sweetness. Huge cherries, fruits grow up to twice the size of our popular Carmen Jewel cherry. They have an excellent flesh-to-pit ratio, so you'll have plenty to enjoy. Each plant yields up to 20 pounds. Manageable plants. Wowza grows 5 to 8 feet tall, so netting, pruning, and harvesting can be often done while standing on the ground. Plus, it can be grown in patio containers. It's cold hardy, developed at the University of Saskatchewan. Wowza handles the cold and is a great choice for northern growers. More than 50 years of research has gone into developing bush cherries with cold hardiness, manageable stature, and good fruit quality. Wowza comes from the same breeding program that brought the Carmen Jewel, the Romeo, and the Juliet. Wowza has an elongated pit that is unsuited for most mechanical harvesters. That means this outstanding cherry will only be available for home gardeners and you-pick operations. Gurney's is proud to be the first nursery to offer Wowza to home gardeners. It's self-pollinating, zones 2 through 7. Okay, and yesterday I said the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have their nests, but the Son of Man, which is us and Jesus, has no place to lay his head in this world. Well, that's in Matthew 8:20. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading. Sin versus error. It is essential that error be not confused with sin. And it is this distinction which makes salvation possible. For error can be corrected and the wrong made right. But sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. The belief in sin is necessarily based on the firm conviction that minds, not bodies, can attack. Well, he's sure letting us know a lot about the way the mind thinks. Hope you're picking all this up. And thus the mind is guilty and will forever so remain unless a mind not part of it can give it absolution. And here's what he has to say about that, all that. Sin calls for punishment as error for correction, and the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane. And to think that there's another mind that's not part of the one mind is insane. Sin is not an error, for sin entails an arrogance which the idea of error lacks. To sin would be to violate reality and succeed. Sin is the proclamation that attack is real and guilt is justified. It assumes the Son of God is guilty and has thus succeeded in losing his innocence and making himself what God created not. Thus is creation seen as not eternal, and the will of God open to opposition and defeat. Sin is the grand illusion, in quotes, grand illusion. Sin is the grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity, for by it God himself is changed and rendered incomplete. The Son of God can be mistaken. He can deceive himself. He can even turn the power of his mind against himself. But he cannot sin. There is nothing he can do that would really change his reality in any way, nor make him really guilty. That is what sin would do, for such is its purpose. Yet for all the wild insanity inherent in the world, in the whole idea of sin, it is impossible. For the wages of sin is death. And how can the immortal die? Paragraph 20. A major tenet in the ego's insane religion is that sin is not error but truth, and it is innocence that would deceive. A major tenet in the ego's insane religion is that sin is not error but truth, and it is innocence that would deceive. Purity is seen as arrogance, and the acceptance of the self as sinful is perceived as holiness. And it is this doctrine which replaces the reality of the Son of God, as his Father created him and willed that he be forever. Is this humility? Or is it rather an attempt to wrest creation away from truth and keep it separate? 21. Any attempt to reinterpret sin as error is always indefensible to the ego. The idea of sin is wholly sacrosanct to its thought system and quite unapproachable except through reverence and awe, and sacrosanct, a principle, a place, or a routine regarded as too important or valuable to be interfered with. So the idea of sin is wholly sacrosanct to the thought system, to the ego's thought system, and quite unapproachable except through reverence and awe. It is the most holy concept of the ego system, holy in quotes. Lovely and powerful, wholly true, and necessarily protected with every defense at its disposal. For here lies its best defense, which all the others serve. Here is its armor, its protection, and the fundamental purpose of the special relationship in its interpretation. 22. It can indeed be said the ego made its world on sin. Only in such a world could everything be upside down. This is the strange illusion which makes the clouds of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. The solidness this world's foundation seems to have is found in this. For sin has changed creation from an idea of God to an ideal the ego wants. A world it rules, made up of bodies, mindless, and capable of complete corruption and decay. If this is a mistake, it can be undone easily by truth. If it is a mistake, it can be undone easily by truth. Any mistake can be corrected if truth be left to judge it. But if the mistake is given the status of truth, to what can it be brought? The holiness of sin is kept in place by just this strange device. As truth, it is inviolate, and everything is brought to it for judgment. As a mistake, it must be brought to truth. It is impossible to have faith in sin, for sin is faithlessness. Yet it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected. 23. There is no stone in all the ego's embattled citadel more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real. There is no stone in all the ego's embattled citadel more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real. The natural expression of what the Son of God has made himself to be and what he is. To the ego, this is no mistake, for this is its reality. This is the truth from which escape will always be impossible. This is his past, his present, and his future. For he has somehow managed to corrupt his Father and changed his mind completely, more than the death of God, whom sin has killed. And this would be the ego's wish, which in its madness it thinks it has accomplished. Well, that's the starting point of the ego's foundation, is that you're separate and that you're corrupt. And that's what we want to start recognizing needs to be our starting point. If we want to share with others, say, consider that you can't be separate from God. And you can't be separate from his holiness. But you can be unaware of it. And your mind can think you're separate, but that doesn't make it true in reality. A part of your mind may be deceived, but Your wholeness is still preserved and will always be. And the last paragraph, 24. Would you not rather that all this be nothing more than a mistake, entirely correctable, and so easily escaped from that its whole correction is like walking through a mist into the sun? For that is all it is. Perhaps you would be tempted to agree with the ego that it is far better to be sinful than mistaken. Yet think you carefully before you allow yourself to make this choice. Approach it not lightly, for it is the choice of hell or heaven. Well, he ends both yesterday's and today by talking about we have this choice of either hell or heaven. Perhaps you would be tempted to agree with the ego that it is far better to be sinful than mistaken. He wants us just to recognize we make mistakes, but we haven't sinned. Yet think you carefully before you allow yourself to make this choice that sin is real and it's not just a mistake, an error. Approach it not lightly, for it is the choice of hell or heaven. Where yesterday, that last sentence, for you can never enslave a body, but an idea is free, incapable of being kept in prison or limited in any way except by the mind that thought it. For it remains joined to its source, which is its jailer or its liberator, according to which it chooses as its purpose for itself. Either the purpose of faithlessness, which would make it a jailer, or the purpose of faith, which make it its liberator. Okay. Well, I hope you got a lot out of that. Let's close with our song today. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. I call upon God's name and on my own. Have faith. Have faith that your brother is sinless and so are you. And that we do make mistakes, but that they can be corrected if you stop and ask for help. Today, ask for help in the form of the affirmation, I call upon God's name and on my own.